My name is Samuel Asirifi. Over the summer, I had an internship with my colleagues with the city of Brampton, and I took keen interest in the diversity and health of the urban street trees in the city of Brampton. One may wonder why the interest in the diversity in the health of the, one may wonder why I took keen interest in investigating the tree species diversity. We all know that a diverse urban forest ensures a long-term provision of ecological goods and services. It will also help minimize tree maintenance costs, help enhance the urban forest biodiversity, and also reduce the losses associated with pest and disease invasions. And in addition, also help to improve the resilience of the urban forest canopy. So as part of my study, I took keen interest to assess the street trees in different residential areas with respect to species composition, richness and evenness of the urban street trees, as well as the tree health. Through the support of the city, I was able to delineate the age of residential areas based on the land use and census data. I utilized the street tree inventory data that was provided by the city of Brampton, thanks to my external supervisor, and there were information on tree condition assessment, diameter size class, as well as species. Data was analyzed. Moll in 1989 proposed that there should be a 5-10-30 diversity management as far as urban forest is concerned. And that means that there should be a cap on the species composition to a 5%, generals to 10%, and then family to 30%. So I analyzed my data based on this diversity management rule through descriptive statistics and non-parametric one-way ANOVA. And also analyzing the diversity in those selected residential areas, I also used the Simpson's diversity index. So these are the areas. The magenta areas are the 1971 residential areas. You see the blue areas were also selected from the 2011 developed areas, and then 1991 was also selected as part of the study. So we use a 20-year kind of difference as far as the urban street tree plantings were concerned. On the composition of species, genus, and family across all residential areas, we realized that 1.4% was the species composition for the 1971 area was 1.4%. Genus was 0.8, family was 0.48. In the 1991, the species composition was 2.25, genus was 1.36, and the family was 0.7. But we saw an improvement in the 2011 residential area where the species composition was 2.62, genus was 1.7, and the family was 1.0. When we analyzed the Simpson's diversity index, we realized that the 2011 residential area was much more diverse than the 1971 and the 1991, which was very encouraging. So with respect to the 1971 areas, we realized that species like the Norway maple had 39% composition, which is way, way, way above the 5% threshold. Species like Colorado blue spruce, honey locust, silver maple, and others were also above the 5% threshold. A similar result was also identified in the 1991 and the 2011 subdivisions. With respect to tree general, we realized that in the 1971 residential area, 50% of the entire tree population was made up of Acer. In 1991, we realized that the same Acer species had 35% composition. In 2011, we also realized Acer had 25% composition among, together with other species. So when you look at the dominant tree species here, you realize that in 1971, the Acer species was 39%. In 1991, it was 24%, but it dropped to 8% in the 2011 residential area. However, a tree like little leaf linden was 6% in the 1971 area, but it rose to 17% in the 1991 area and came down to 15%. Honey locust also saw a massive increase from 5% in 1971 to 15% in 1991, and it later dropped to 13% in 2011. In terms of stem diameter classes, we realized the majority of the 1971 residential area tree species fall within the range of 31 to 45 centimeters. In 1991, majority of the tree population fall within the 16 to 30 centimeter diameter class, which was 46%. In the 2011 residential area, a whopping 88% of the street trees had a diameter range of 0 to 15 centimeters, which was not unexpected though. In terms of the stem diameter classes for the dominant species, we realized that the Norway maple had dominance in the 31 to 45 centimeters, whilst the silver maple, majority of the silver maple fell within the range of 75 centimeters and above. That means that the silver maple maximized in terms of tree canopy more than the Norway maple. In terms of overall street tree condition rating, we realize that majority of these trees are in a fair condition. For instance, in the 1971, majority of the street trees were rated within 86% were rated to be in a fair condition, whilst in 2011, majority were rated to be 93% were rated to be in a fair condition. The other condition ratings were found to be very insignificant. So we also identified a tree condition rating for the dominant species in the residential areas that were selected. With regards to little leaf linden, for instance, we realized that 93% fall within the fair rating as well. Similar rating was also identified on honey locust and Norway maple. So based on the 5-10-30 diversity management rule, we realized that in 1971 residential area, only 6 species make up 71% of the entire tree population. 6 dominant species exceed the 5%. They make up the 71% tree population. The Norway maple was found to be 39%. Acer species was found to be the most dominant genus, making up 51%. And Asirifi was found to be the most dominant family, constituting 51%. With regards to the 1991 residential area, 5 species were also found to constitute 65% of the entire street tree population. The Norway maple was also found to constitute 24%. 5 genera were found to constitute 77% of the entire tree population, and Asirifi as well dominated with 35%. In 2011 residential area, 9 species were also found to exceed the 5% cap with 75% in species composition. The little leaf linden was above the Norway maple in terms of composition with 15%. We found 3 genera to constitute 52% of the entire tree population. Acer species was also found to be the most dominant genus, making up 25%, whilst Asirifi as well was made up of 24%. So you realize that in the 2011 residential area, the family composition never exceeded the 30% cap. In conclusion, we realize that the Brampton street trees have very low species richness. We also realize that very few street trees dominate, which is a threat to biodiversity, because there is overabundance of Acer species and the Asirifi family. There is also extreme overabundance of Norway maple, and highly significant number of trees are in a fair condition, which means that the city could suffer severe loss in tree canopy cover in case of emergence of invasive pests and diseases and other unforeseen environmental stress conditions. So the study recommends that the city pay critical attention to species composition by following the 5-10-30 diversity rule, which was proposed by Moll in 1989, improve the street tree maintenance to enhance their conditions, because even though the ratings were based on the surveyors or based on visual assessment, you could realize that rating a tree, majority of the trees in a very fair condition isn't quite encouraging. We also realize that the visual assessment of the tree condition tends to be subjective, as I earlier said, so the city should rather adopt an inventory protocol that will provide more detailed and accurate scientific data. On this note, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to my external supervisor, Ed. You were more of a big brother throughout the summer. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Prof. Danijela and Prof. J. Malcolm. I do recall I bumped into Jay's office to help me with the data crunching without appointment, and he never hesitated to help. My colleagues, Justin Rai, Ramina, and Carissa, I thank you all for your support, and I thank everyone. Thank you for coming.
Questions?
Thanks, Samuel. I just wondered if you could, maybe I missed this, define the 5-10-30 diversity rule a little bit better for me. Is it not working?
Okay.
Okay.
So
and you know how do other municipalities or locations use it?
Okay. Based on the various studies, I realized none of the cities so far meet the diversity rule. And 5-10-30 means that the species composition should be 5%. It shouldn't exceed 5% in terms of the tree population. The genus composition, no genus should exceed 10%, and no family should exceed 30%. Unfortunately, none of the cities meet this cap. Yeah, so far.
Which ones have you sort of looked at, or what are you comparing to? You say none of the cities meet.
Yeah, I look at the city of Toronto. I look at Oakville. Yeah. I also look at Montreal, and I also look at some cities within the United States of America, and unfortunately, none of them was reported to have met the 5-10-30 diversity management rule.
So, do you think it's a good rule?
Yes.
Nobody's meeting it, and what's its purpose?
Okay. So some of the studies also propose a 10-20-30, all right? And that seems to be more achievable than the 5-10-30. But in terms of biodiversity enhancement, I will personally go for the 5-10-30, which is why I emphasize on.
Okay. The other question I had is, so the overall street tree condition was fair.
Fair.
And what you're saying, it didn't differ. It did differ, or it didn't differ from 1971, 91.
Yeah. All the residential areas that were selected, overwhelming majority was found to be in a fair condition.
Right.
Yeah,
but that didn't change over 20, 30 years. It's all roughly in the same place.
Yeah. But the question is, how fair is the fair?
Yeah.
Because
what does fair mean?
Assessment.
So what does fair mean? So you say it's a fair rating. What do you use? What's the basis of that rating?
Okay,
of fair, or what do you include?
So assessing the overall tree condition, you look at the There is a picture here.
Yeah.
As you can see in this picture, I'll rate this tree as fair because it seems to have some few symptoms. Yeah, but I can't rate this tree as good. But when you look at the second picture, I will rate this tree to be in a very good condition.
So what features are you using? I
The
guess that's
scars.
my question. What?
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
the scars and all those defoliations and in terms of tree canopy, the crown size, the live crown ratio and all that, based on the surveyor's perspective.
Do you know if any of those particular criteria are rated more heavily than others? Like to arrive at a fair rating, is defoliation more important than a scar on the tree, or do you know?
From my personal perspective, rating the tree, I mostly based on the live crown ratio as the major determinant of the tree condition before I look at the symptoms. Yeah.
Okay, so to follow up what Sandy asked about fair tree condition. So if you go next year to do the inventory, would you be able to rate the same way trees? Or if I go after you, what's your feeling? Would we agree on tree condition?
As I said earlier, it's very subjective because I may rate a tree to be in a fair condition, but Ramina may rate it to be in a good condition. Other surveyors may also rate it in a different condition, which explains why I recommended that the city adopt a protocol that will provide more scientific data, because basing the tree condition on a visual assessment isn't enough. Yeah.
My other question was, I was surprised with Colorado blue spruce being as a street tree. What happened there? How did you capture that as a street tree?
Based on our inventory, we captured them on the street. Surprisingly, I realized the city of Brampton has a lot of Colorado blue spruce than most of the cities, and for me, it was even a new information that I gathered. I wasn't expecting to see a lot of Colorado blue spruce on the streets, but that is what we captured throughout our intention. It wasn't the major street tree species, but it was rated among the most commonly planted species in the city. And
along Sandy's question, 5, 10, 30 rule, how that lines up with biodiversity and native species? If you follow this rule, how many species would you need? And would our native species would be enough to support this?
I think following that, the 5, 10, 30 management rule, you need more numerous fast-growing species, not necessarily the native ones, but other good urban street tree species identified in other areas, because if you focus mainly on the native species, I don't think you can ever meet the 5, 10, 30 management rule.
Just a follow-up comment on Danijela's question. Carissa said that you should plant monotypic species, which are species that only have one species in the, what is it, the genus or the yeah, so that might be one way to meet those goals. So you guys maybe should consult on your recommendations.
So not a question, but a comment to answer your question about the Colorado blue spruce. For the tree inventory, when we were taking the tree inventory, we didn't just do street trees, like trees that were on the boulevards or the sidewalks. What we did is that, depending on where the property line was, for specific properties, whether it was at the front of the driveway or in the middle of the driveway, those trees that are in front of that property line, they all belong to the city. So residents will plant Colorado blue spruce or other species, and that's how they ended up being captured in the inventory. So they're not street trees per se. They were just captured as city trees. You're welcome. Yeah.
That's a question.
I think you're concerned that even greater when you think that a lot of arborists are concerned about silver maple because although it's a native tree, it tends to hollow as it gets older and can become dangerous. But that photo of the scar is actually very significant because in my experience, it shows a common problem of maintenance by municipal governments that it often when grass cutting is done, it does that kind of damage, and it also shows, I think, a need for more of a naturalistic approach to this sort of landscape, so you don't have everything, mowed in, monoculture like you see there.
Thank you.